Today I'm talking with the Right Honourable Stephen Yarwood, the Lord Mayor of the City of Adelaide. So to start off with, Stephen, how long have you been involved in local government?
Well, I've actually worked in local government as an urban planner, so for the City of Playford for 6 years, doing a whole pile of strategic and policy planning around urban growth at the fringe of metropolitan Adelaide. Before that I worked in state and local state government as well, including working in Parliament, but been an elected member for 5 years now, 3 as a councillor and 2 as the Lord Mayor.
Yeah. So in that time, including your professional side as well as the official side, you would have seen, over that time, the demands on and the expectations on local government keep increasing, expected to take on more responsibilities, but often without the resources. So how do you go about balancing those demands and the resources that you have as a council?
Well, it's certainly a big issue for local government. In fact, it's a big issue for the country. Rounded off, I think council is responsible in Australia for around 90% of all infrastructure, but generates only about 5% of the actual income. So our relationship with state governments, and more importantly moving into the future, federal governments, is incredibly important. Conversation around constitutional recognition of local government is all about the federal government being able to provide direct financial assistance for infrastructure and delivery on the ground for our cities, for our states, and indeed for our nation. So it's a very demanding thing. I've also certainly seen over time the expectation of local government, which is really about, for me, the business of life. Means that we're responsible for such an incredibly diverse range of things, and you see that even in the Mayor's role, in the sense that it's 50% obligation, swearing in new citizens, being patrons of organisations, attending events and being a part of the community, as well as then needing to also be the chairman of a company that's building a globally competitive city in the 21st century economy. So there are some real challenges between the traditional elements of local government and the modern expectations, and that strikes at the very heart of our constitution and at the very future that we want to build for our cities to make Australia a globally competitive country.
And key to that would be engaging with the community, so their expectations can be moderated, understood, and that you as a council can deliver what they require. So how do you go about engaging fully with the community?
Well, local government really is that level of government that's absolutely connected to the people, and there are so many different ways then and so many tools that you can use. I think the best advice I could offer is to embrace the entire spectrum. There is no one simple answer or one simple solution. For example, it takes just a day to door knock most main streets in most communities. In the City of Adelaide, our major shopping district, the Rundle Mall, takes me 3 days to knock on every single door. That's not a bad outcome, because it means every time you walk back into their business, even if you're just buying a sandwich, they'll still say, "Hello, Stephen," and you're directly connected to that community. But also a whole range of other mechanisms I think are important, and Adelaide City Council is working very hard at being a communicator. Say 5-10 years ago, we were all beholden to Fairfax and News Limited. It's almost been a resetting of the clock when it comes to social media, online production, our own video production. So we are communicating through newsletters, magazines. We're working with third-party people to get those third-party endorsements and messages out. I'm very active in social media. The organisation's creating its own video production. So there's a whole range of tools that we need to use, but I made a New Year's resolution about 6 years ago to speak to strangers, and look where it's got me. I think the idea of not being afraid to talk to strangers and meet people that aren't necessarily engaged in your conversation is a challenge. It's very easy to sit around with your friends and agree. It's much more stimulating to find out what a broader range of people actually think about the future of our communities.
So that engagement with individuals or talking to strangers, you use social media yourself. Is that a way that local governments can better harness the new communication channels?
Absolutely, and I think the challenge has got to be that from an elected member perspective, you must manage that yourself, and it is time consuming, and it takes training and development to get your head around what it means, because the truth is there is no neutral outcome in social media. So if you respond to something and help somebody, you go up in their expectations. If you don't respond or help that person who's writing to you on social media, you can actually go down. So it's all way up or all way down. There's not really much in between. The other challenge is for corporations that have, rules, regulations, confidentiality issues. It's a lot easier for a mayor to say what he thinks. It's much more difficult for a 25-year-old person with 3 screens in front of them to be able to respond to politically sensitive issues and get it right. But the truth is that everyone's employees in local government in particular, they all have smartphones. They're all on Facebook, they've got Twitter accounts. They're going to do it whether you tell them they can or can't in their lunch while they're having a cigarette. And so we really actually need to be much more open-minded and say maybe everyone in the organisation should be allowed to use social media, and if you're going to do it, these are some basic rules. And then if you get in trouble, you need to scale it up to get help as quickly as possible and not try and sweep it under the carpet. There's a whole new culture here that needs to be that everyone is an advocate for the corporation and that we've all got our own way of spreading those messages virally.
And communities tend to, in general, be resistant to change that they don't understand and fully embrace. So is there a role for social media in trying to break down that barrier to change? And what other techniques does Adelaide use in trying to be innovative but possibly facing community resistance?
Well, it's a great question, because in the last 6 months we've really broken the seal on progress in Adelaide with the single biggest year of development of infrastructure in the entire history of the city. But whilst everyone wants progress, change is always difficult for people, and I've certainly experienced that absolutely firsthand. And it's once again it's about a spectrum of options. Social media is not the nirvana. Interestingly, people make the mistake of assuming that social media is for young people. The average Facebook user, I think, is about 33. The average Twitter account is about 38 years old. So it is actually more of a sort of a middle-age medium. But it is also about getting out there, making time to walk into a business and talk to all the businesses, keeping in mind that if you speak to all the businesses in a street, most of those people speak to most of the community in the streets around it, and understanding the viral nature of communications as a whole. I think we need to go beyond just letters in letterboxes, because something that comes in the mail from your federal, state or local government tends to either be a bill or not very interesting. And so we need to be unique about place governance, getting local people employed to actually manage districts, walk in, communicate, have that feedback loop, and use those sorts of mechanisms. But once again, good quality magazines, third-party endorsement, getting external stakeholders to engage in your conversation throughout the media. A big one for educating the media. Often they are looking for a controversial, 5-second bite, which actually is completely counterproductive to the interests of the city or the state. And so engaging the media up front and being honest and open and candid about what you're trying to achieve and why is just as important as social media. But once again, it's not about putting your eggs in one basket. It's about understanding, even in social media, that it's not all about Twitter or Facebook, but there is LinkedIn and a range of email databases and other tools that you can use to, catch a wider number of tribes.
Yeah. And so what would be a good example of where Adelaide has successfully introduced change, substantial change, in a way that you think went well, and what were the key ingredients to that success?
Well, we've got a program called Splash Adelaide, which is all about city activation and bringing the streets to life. It's about consultation by doing. So we don't put plans in an office council room and hope that people will come and see them. We actually send the boys out, and it's mostly guys from the depot, with a whole pile of stuff on the back of the ute. They put it in a laneway, they close it, they test and move things around. That could be tennis tables, it could be fake grass, often put trees, flowers, seating for people, and it's all about bringing our laneways to life, transferring them from places for cars to places for people. And what's been wonderful about this is that it's actually about that consultation by doing. We might make mistakes, but by doing so we're learning as we go, and we're building an entrepreneurial ecosystem which is all about experimentation and trial. And in Adelaide's particular example, 50% of the daily users of the city are under the age of 30. They don't want gold taps, they don't want expensive outdoor dining restaurants. They actually want wooden pallets, they want a hole-in-the-wall bar, and they want a bit of live music away from the hustle and bustle of the social elite, which has traditionally been the leaders of the community who build a city in their own eyes and their own values. And so for me, this whole sense of actually cutting through red tape, just get out there and physically trying stuff, almost sort of bombing a place by just coming in and doing it, and then just getting feedback, and if it doesn't work, coming back the next night, moving things around. If it doesn't work again, stick it on the back of a truck, try a different laneway, and actually working with the small businesses in those streets, working with the younger entrepreneurs in terms of maybe mobile food vending and outdoor dining. They're all important parts of it. So for us, it's actually a conscious decision to have more fun on the streets of Adelaide, but it's so that we can build an environment where university graduates, younger people want to stay in Adelaide, start their businesses in Adelaide and build that entrepreneurial ecosystem from the ground up. It's been a really positive, fun and interesting way of working with residents, with businesses, and actually finally having a council that's doing stuff.
Very good. And what would you see as constraints that any local government's going to face in trying to go about what you've been describing?
Well, there's always constraints in local government. In fact, many of them are rules that we've set ourselves. Indeed, state governments and federal governments through planning codes and building codes, liquor licensing, are all things that are overlaid. That's what makes all of our Australian cities some of the most livable in the world, because we have good governance, we have good controls, people don't get sick from eating food, getting food poisoning, and we have minimal crime because we're able to control these issues. So we need to celebrate some of these rules and regulations and where it's got us today, but what we also need to do is challenging the prevailing paradigm of administering those rules as being getting people to fill out forms, getting people to jump through hoops to get across the line, to going from being the administrator of rules to the facilitator of outcomes. So Adelaide City Council's really focusing on place governance and place making. So instead of being about the rules and regulations, it's actually about what happens in the streets of the City of Adelaide and the outcomes that people will physically see, and getting the administration to think more about how can we help these people deliver outcomes on the street, rather than how do we control what they're trying to achieve to minimise the risk. And so there is a bit of a opening up to service delivery, being prepared to engage in a conversation around what is acceptable risk versus what is unacceptable risk, and also helping younger people who are intimidated by the system get through a complex environment with innovative solutions rather than pricing them out of the market. So it's all about service delivery and place outcomes rather than actually being that doorkeeper of regulation.
That goes to the nature of your own people, the culture that they embrace as employees of the city. Has Adelaide gone about a particular way of trying to change the culture of the workplace in which people make those decisions?
Look, there's absolutely no doubt, and there's two elements to this. There's the culture of the corporation itself and the culture of the community. And in fact, this is for me all about the relationship between the CEO and the Lord Mayor. I like to say that he can have all 900 staff and I'll have the 200,000 daily stakeholders of the City of Adelaide, and we'll call that a fair split. And for me, it's about making sure that I'm supporting the CEO to motivate and inspire the administration to be innovative, think flexibly, find alternative solutions and get outcomes on the streets. But also it's not just about big government and small community. It actually has to be the other way around. It has to be about small government and big community, where the council is not doing everything, but the council is curating an environment in which private enterprise and the community can actually achieve their outcomes. So just as in an art gallery, the curator doesn't paint all the paintings and hang them on the wall, he finds the best artists to bring the gallery to life. A good city manager, a mayor and a CEO together, should actually be creating an environment where the artists, the businesses, the entrepreneurs, the organisations in that city can flourish. So for me, it's about me building a culture of getting the small businesses to have more outdoor dining, to explore closing off a street, to have a street party, to be a part of the cultural change that's happening in the city. So it has to be a partnership and it has to be that shared vision. And so by getting the right people to all take responsibility for their own core jobs, rather than a Lord Mayor that wants to be a CEO or a CEO that wants to be a Lord Mayor, is about splitting the division of power, having that an influence and having that genuine shared vision, and then getting out there and working as a team, because it's the interface between the corporation of the city and the staff and the community where the magic will actually happen.
So that key relationship between the elected leader and the CEO of a council, do you think that's appreciated and understood across Australian local government, or do you think you're still the exception, or it's developing in some ways?
Well, I certainly wouldn't profess to be the exception, and it's something that I learnt as a core value through my Masters in Business Administration. So, I really pride myself on not being a political figure, but being a professional community leader. Town planner with an MBA, I just think it's nice that we can maybe actually listen to the experts' advice, take it on board and champion it in the best possible way, rather than having our own adopted vision. So my vision is really a vision that comes from my own professional learnings and having been an expert offering advice to political leadership. There's no doubt that, I think most technical pundits and commentators would acknowledge the core role between a Lord Mayor and a CEO as being critical, but you can't reinforce that enough. And certainly it's been a huge success factor in our ability to be an innovative council. And if you haven't been to Adelaide, it's worth coming back to have a look, because we're having our single biggest year of infrastructure development this year and a huge amount of change on the streets. So it is actually evolving before our very eyes right now. And that core relationship has been at the very essence of, a CEO and a chairman who trust each other intimately in an environment where CEOs of private sector or state government, ministers, they all have egos. They're all driving their own agenda. They all want their next promotion. And to be able to not be divided and conquered and have that absolutely intimate trust of each other has been a really empowering opportunity for us to meet rarely. We meet regularly, but not that often, in the sense that we're not in each other's pocket. we almost don't want to be in the same room because we've both got jobs to do, and we need to spread our messages virally, and we won't be effective if we're living in each other's pockets.
Okay, thank you very much for those insights. They've been most valuable.
My pleasure.